Okay, so I wanted to in this video talk a little bit about air to ground and why it potentially is in the game. There are a few good reasons to have air to ground in the game. One of the most simple ones is that when you're out of an area that you should be fighting at, it kind of like slims off the hard and keeps people from kind of like even running from base to base, for example. It does also stop. And so that is one of the positives. It keeps people within like a well-defined area and close to cover of buildings. And so it does really keep even both groups somewhat clustered together and instead of super spread out on a base. And that's the same mechanic which drives a base capture and a base point, is that again people do have to clump together in a confined space in order to fight over that capture point. Now I try to think of what else air to ground has to offer people other than the pilots, and I have a very difficult time coming up with anything. Of course, air to ground pilots have a bunch of fun. If you get good at playing air to ground, you can oftentimes farm up even, a 10 KD, a 20 KD. And I think for a lot of people that feels unfair, and I think that's what a lot of people have trouble with air to ground for. If you actually look at air to ground players statistically, on average, their kills per minute will actually be lower than a lot of infantry players. And so the actual effectiveness of air to ground as a way to play the game is somewhat useful because again it does hard people into buildings. It doesn't have a massive kill potential unless of course you're extremely high skilled and you can reach 2 kpm on an ESF air to ground, which is very rare. The overwhelming majority of the time for average players and even skilled players, you can generally do better in terms of kills per minute in infantry. But people never really see the pilot driving between bases. People never really see the pilot getting harded away by a skyguard or by some lock-ons. People only really see them dying and them not getting any retribution for that death. And I think that's what really makes a lot of people salty at air to ground pilots specifically. The other part that makes air to grounding not feel super fun is that there's no good counter to it before you die. Of course, once you've died you can pull a skyguard or you can pull an anti-air max, which does have some usefulness, although of course even then usually you'll just tickle the ESF and they'll go off to another fight to live another day, and so you never really get that payback. And if you decide to play air to air and fight that person in ESFs, a lot of the time I've noticed when I was training for lane smash, I would just get double teamed by a lot of people in ESFs, which made the experience of playing ESFs less about skill and more about if you had more numbers than the other person. There is also one other annoying thing about air to ground players, and that is how quickly you die. It isn't just that you don't have much of a response until you die, it's also if you're playing against a Banshee, you really will die in like half a second. It's that quick. And that does have an unfair feeling associated with it. At least if you get killed by a salty heavy vet, you know, okay, it's probably because I didn't aim very well, or it's because they peeked the corner, or it's because I was caught out of position, I didn't have any cover near to me so I could reset the fight and engage on equal terms. And again with air to ground, instead of all of those situations at which you can think, okay, I did this wrong, instead oftentimes it's just like, oh, I wanted to push and kill the enemy Sunday, but I guess I can't do that now unless I decide to go commit several minutes. But I do think there's an alternative to simply nerfing the air to ground capabilities of ESFs, and instead we could look at it from a base design perspective. I don't see any real good reason why you couldn't have more natural canopies, trees and other things in order to stop people from air to ground farming as easily. We do know very clearly that that does work on Hossin to an extent. Now of course Hossin's an extreme example with a lot of trees, but again like man-made structures would help alleviate some of the pain points associated with people getting air to ground farmed, because you can say, okay, I can still run to this Sunday area if I want to kill the Sunday, and there's some cover along the way, and maybe it's only 50% cover or whatever. Simply something to make people getting farmed by air to ground a little bit more difficult on bases that they're trying to fight at might be useful. Now you could also, and I think this would be way too much effort, but if the devs did have more resources, you could have more bases that are underground or fights that are underground. I think that that does have a unique feel to it, and it is underutilized in Planetside and is a nice fun mechanic to use, and it is a shame that most of the bases are actually above ground. I also think with OSHA's design we did see a lot of problems with that, but at the same time we did see construction bases having more areas in which they can be built did kind of stop people from air to ground farming to an extent, and we did also have things like interlink facilities which are generally speaking indoors, with also an outdoors area which air to ground still has some viability with, and again does hard people inside, which I think is like a good compromise. And if we look at something like Trident, we see a similar pattern there, where again the top is exposed and so air to ground does still have viability, but once you're inside you don't have to worry about. Now I do suspect that the devs really did underplay how much heavy anvils would be used and anti-aircraft maxes relative to how much they are used. I think the devs thought that lodestars would be used a lot more for tridents, when really they're not used that much, and it is genuinely heavy anvils which are used to capture the trident bases on OSHA. On other bases in OSHA we did see large areas between the spawn points and the capture point which you would have to run between, and some of them, to be fair, did have this partial cover that I'm talking about. You know, they had walkways with a roof on top, and that kind of stuff is appreciated, and I think implementing that kind of stuff into the other maps might have some usefulness. And I don't think it has to be something super complicated. I really think just copy pasting 5 different versions of these kind of canopy structures which are of varying different lengths might be as much as they need to do. It doesn't have to be a massive overhaul, and I assume that doesn't take a massive amount of work to do, but I could be wrong. Now, as always, I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this. Do you think that air to grounding is unfun? What do you think could be changed in order to make it better if you do find it unfun? So as always, have a wonderful day. Until next time, I'm out. GG. Bye bye.